Welcome, everybody. I'm thrilled to have you all join us. We're going to give the stragglers like another 30 seconds, but we run a tight ship here at Drift, so we'll get going shortly. But we're thrilled to be talking about how the blurred line between B2B and B2C ignites growth. Topic I am super passionate about as a millennial, as a marketer. I think it's cool to be in B2B marketing right now because it is, I feel like there's that 3-year window where B2C is doing all this cool stuff and then B2B gets it 3 years later. And I feel like that window's closing and we're able to do a lot of cool stuff too. So that's 30 seconds. Let's introduce ourselves to the crowd. I'll start. Hello, everybody. My name is Justin Keller. I'm the VP of Revenue Marketing here at Drift. And I am going to kind of try and shut up and just not get in the way of these two very smart mics that are going to be joining us today. First, I'd like to introduce Mike Barbeau, or maybe you introduce yourself to people, but principal at Shift Paradigm, please.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. No good. A webinar can't have at least 2 mics in it, right? So Mike Barbeau, principal at Shift Paradigm, which means I have a book of business of clients that whose opinions I'll try to represent today as to, not just talk in theory, but what are my clients asking me on a regular basis. I've spent 20 years of working with clients in a bunch of different capacities, brand advertising to ad tech to now sort of the nuts and bolts of marketing technology. And when this topic came up from Drift, one of the first person I thought of was actually Mike Kaput in terms of providing an organizational sort of perspective on the whole space of AI. So I'll let Mike introduce himself, as I think he's going to be a great person to make sure we're not just navel gazing here.
Well, thanks, Justin and Mike. My name is Mike Kaput. I'm Chief Content Officer at Marketing AI Institute, and we're an organization that helps make AI approachable and actionable for marketers. We actually came out of the agency world after a decade and a half of doing a lot of mostly B2B marketing for a variety of clients. We started applying artificial intelligence to our own business, and in the process kind of learned that AI is going to probably have some pretty significant effects on the marketing industry. So at Marketing AI Institute, my job is to build our audience, generate leads for us, and generally educate marketers on the topic of AI. And also, I will add, we talked before the webinar that I am actually going to, for purposes of discussion here, go by Kaput, my last name, which is quite distinctive. And also a lot of people call me, so we don't get the mics confused.
Yeah, it'll be easier when I'm calling on people. So Kaput, Barbeau, you guys ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Quick overview of our agenda today, so you know what you're expecting. We're going to talk about the shifts in the buying experience, as you may have gleaned from the session title. Talk about B2C and B2B personalization strategies. Going to touch on conversational marketing because, hello, you're at a Drift webinar. And we will close off on, I think we'll probably spend a good amount of time on artificial intelligence. So let's start off with shifts in the buying experience. I think like I mentioned, the millennial, I think one of the biggest things is the generational shifts that we're seeing. Over 2/3 of a buying committee has a millennial on it now. And I think something like 30% of millennials are now senior decision makers in companies. And I think that has huge rippling effects on how buyers come to buy, what the experiences they're expecting. But I think there's so much more that's underpinning what's going on, technology, the media, all that stuff. So how about Barbeau, if you don't mind starting us off, what are you seeing? What are your clients seeing?
I thought you said well in the introduction that the gap between B2C and B2B, like there's no longer a 3-year lag or whatever it was previously. And really, there's no longer a wall where B2B is like, we're different. We don't need that stuff. It's about shaking hands and having conversations face to face. I think the preponderance of technology has been great. It also causes the problem of what technologies are you going to choose. But if you look at what the two sides are now stealing from each other, because a very smart British man early in my career said no marketing idea hasn't been done before, that's now happening as it relates to B2B and B2C. B2B is taking tone, the personal touch, less jargon, better UX, UI, things that they're trying to apply from the typically B2C side of the house. B2C is looking at more tech, more trigger related items, more measurement and management of what's happening versus the trust us, the brand. The ads are going to be great. People will buy. There's more of a structured approach, and even team building is starting to kind of coalesce, where it isn't, you know, a wall between the two teams and organizations. We have a lot of B2B, we have a lot of B2C. We also have a lot of B2B2C clients where you get to see both in one. So I think all of that is applying to what is happening on the buying side, right? Like, we wouldn't be doing any of these things if people weren't showing us that they needed to buy differently. And I think that's where this sort of confluence of insights, people on both sides, us as marketers, them as buyers, and technology as shift paradigm, we're seeing a lot of that. And we're trying to educate our clients on how it's all changing in terms of how our people are taking out their wallets and giving money. But Kaput, is that in line with sort of what you guys are saying?
Yeah, definitely. And on a practical and tactical level, I couldn't agree more. I also think on kind of, not to get too abstract, but from like a psychological shift, I truly do think that we are seeing a convergence of B2B and B2C to the point where I honestly don't know if I can tell the difference from an approach perspective, just because I think everyone, especially millennials, as an older millennial myself, which is horrifying to say, I would say that people are tapped out. I mean, COVID's part of it, but generally, I think people they have zero tolerance for BS. Like they have less time than ever, less bandwidth than ever, but people are also much more conscious of you know, bandwidth and time at the same time. I really do think like there is a huge shift in the sense of you're just not going to make it anymore doing something that someone is like nice to have versus need to have. I just really think in marketing and sales approaches, it's never been harder to break through noise, but also people are much more protective of their time and energy, I would say. And that's like a huge kind of macro shift I've seen.
I think that's right on. I think, and you nailed it. Like COVID, I think lessened people's tolerance for bullshit, right?
Yes.
Especially millennials, you know, already digital natives, but because there was no in-person at all, it became everything. You know, and we saw this, you know, B2B marketers, as soon as COVID hit, investment in digital skyrocketed. So if you were working at a digital marketing vendor, you had a good year. But I think it's an interesting shift that I don't know if we'll ever go back, but I do agree. Like this all happened right as the noise was at a fever pitch. And so going back to your point, Barbo, about like B2C companies, and we'll get into this topic in a minute, so maybe I save this, or maybe we move on. But it must be good for you guys, because all of a sudden B2B companies don't feel like they need to have everything be navy blue and have stock photos of people shaking hands. And they want to have a little more personality show up, because that is the entire experience now. Is that like kind of the tone that your clients are bringing to the table?
It is. Look, there will always be navy blue and stock photos. Like we're going to have jobs because of it. But I think one of the most interesting things I saw that continues to happen, I think, is tied to the fact that people are buyers of any kind are just hypersensitive to the messages they get. Technology has made them way better at seeing the BS too, right? So one of the most interesting things I saw, for better or worse, when COVID came out, was there was the first companies to market with here's how we're responding to COVID. And that was a relevant message for days, not weeks, days. Mm-hmm. And then there was the companies that were 3 months, they took their typical marketing cycles to get that message out. And 3 months later, they were sending it. And people are like, what the hell is this? Like, we've moved way past that. But I saw a marketing team that actually had struggled with B2B messaging of being relevant in the moment, immediately recognized they were a malware company, immediately recognized that people were going from offices to home. They switched all their imagery to home-based imagery. Everything was about the new world order, things changing. Here's how we're responding. So they skipped past the bland messaging, took what was really a consumer message and said, look, we hear you, we get you, you're at your kitchen table, we can help. And they had one of their best quarters straight out of the gates because of that. So they recognized what their buyers were probably experiencing and went right at it and kind of threw out their marketing plan. And like, that's where the sort of confluence of how people buy and how B2B and B2C teams are operating, it starts to get really interesting. If you go, you take yourself out of your typical schedules and go like, what do we actually need to do for them? Not for us, not for our process and our message and that great stock photo we love, but like, what do they need to see? Like, you can do some really cool shit.
Yeah. I love it. Well, let's segue into personalization strategies. So in my opinion, and please disagree with me, I think there's 5 letters, 2 acronyms that are really behind what we're able to do at a personalization level. We all agree it's noisier than ever. We need to make that digital connection. The best way to do that is personalization. What the things underpinning that to me are CDPs, so consumer data platforms, and AI. So maybe Kaput, talk to us a little bit about, I mean, personalization one-to-one, easy, great, works all day, but it doesn't scale. How can AI help us there?
Yeah, so I think personalization is kind of the bridge to understanding the power of AI. It's not the only thing that artificial intelligence does in a marketing and sales context, but it's really one of, if not the most important thing. So I think there's 2 sides to this. There's the human and the machine. The human side of this is everything we just talked about, where consumer expectations are not even through the roof. They're in the stratosphere about experience, about personalization, not to mention you really have to earn every second of attention that you have from consumers, especially from the millennial kind of segment and younger. So given that, personalization is the quickest, easiest, and best way to get someone to care about what you're talking about. The problem is it's extremely hard. Like we've all, been in marketing a decade, 2 decades, plus like we've done personalization, on a broad level manually. And it's a real pain in the ass. It's extremely time and resource intensive. Whereas artificial intelligence actually can solve this problem by not only delivering better personalization, because it is actually based on behaviors, data, things like that, but also one-to-one personalization at scale is really the key that certain AI tools in different marketing contexts can deliver. So like, here's a really down-to-earth example is we work with a company called Rasa, RASA.io. And what they do is they do newsletter personalization. So what happens is if you run your newsletter through Rasa, what it'll do is every time the newsletter sends, it'll start out with a broad newsletter, kind of like we, would send generally in a email marketing department. Once people start engaging with the content, it will use their behavior to say, okay, I'm actually going to send Mike Barbeau more content around CDPs, but Justin actually engages more with content around conversational marketing. So I'm going to send him more from the same pool of sources. So it's one of these things where like you actually are getting higher open rates, higher engagement, higher customer satisfaction, because you're receiving something that I didn't sit down and curate thinking like, oh, I think you're going to like this. A machine did it. So it's kind of a good balance of like that one-to-one personalization, but you do need the machine to do it at scale.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that data really comes to bear. I mean, when you're able to, and this is going to be accelerated quickly with the death of cookies, but building that first party data set is going to be critical to personalization for companies in the future. So if you're listening to this, you're not thinking about your first party data strategy, finish listening to us, but then maybe fire up the Google and find out what you need to be doing there. Barbeau,
hang
what
up
about
now
you?
and
What's your
call
take?
911. Yeah. No, I think it's interesting. You need the qualitative and the quantitative. Like that's not a new thing, but one thing, like if you go all the way to CDPs and you're looking at all the signals and you're trying to read those tea leaves, sometimes you forget the example. And this is true to a client of ours where they're architects putting together bids for commercial contracting. And a lot of those bids come in at like 1, 2 a.m. There's some architect who just 6 years out of school wondering why they picked architecture is putting together that bid at 2 in the morning. And there's a way for even Drift to show up. I show up on the site. I'm that architect. I show up, and it's less about who I am. I'm a left-handed architect living in Wichita at a big firm. It's more about the fact that it's 1 a.m. And you can just say, hey, you're here. We know you're probably working late. Here's a Sendoso gift card for $15. We know you're going to need the coffee tomorrow morning. So there's like a little bit of that balance of the qualitative discussion of that I had with that architect just to learn what the business was all about. I know that those moments happen. So I don't need to use the data. I just need to know what I know, use what I know about that architect. But then there's the ongoing stuff that Kaput's talking about, which is like, how do I make sure all the other times all those things are being triggered and don't have to be manually run? Because that's the tricky part with personalization. The deeper you get into a funnel, the more dangerous that personalization can be. Like if I call my wife by the wrong name, bad things happen because of how well we know each other. So you have to have that balance of how things are working. And I think it's tricky, but it's also fun, and goes back to the fact that we're not B2B marketers. We're not B2C marketers. We're not even really marketers. Like I don't really like the human to human as a handle for it. But if we can stop thinking about job titles and just go, does it make sense? Like, would I want to see this if I was them? Like that coffee thing is like, yeah, dude, that would make me a believer that company gets me more so than I got the CDP email at the right time. Right. So balancing those things is why it's always a dance. And frankly, even with all this technology, like we just need to be creative and resourceful in how we're going about these things.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And it's a balancing act, right? We want to have the context. We don't want to show that we know too much, because that's another thing. If we know so much about someone, we could all of a sudden be a little bit creepy. That moment when you're on Instagram and you get an ad for something, you don't even know if you said that out loud, like it's somehow reading your thoughts now, is a little, can get you a little bit spooked. So I think we're going to be walking a really thin line in the near future between how much do we know, how much do we want to show that we know, how do we personalize the right amount without being creepy, but how do we personalize enough, to your point, Kaput, about making sure that we make someone care. How do you, and if you're listening, obviously this is not a very scripted webinar, but Kaput, before we move on, how can marketers start to think about how AI can help them with that personalization strategy and to like not feel like they're walking that tightrope as much?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's it starts with kind of understanding, this can sound super obvious, but I don't think it is, understanding the nature of personalization. Like Barbo just said, like, it's not necessarily about how much we know about you. It's not the personalization part. It's just treating you as a person. So like, it's okay. Like the personalization component can be knowing nothing about this person except it's 1 a.m. Like that is really, really important. And I think a lot of marketers, myself included at times, have kind of got too caught up in saying, okay, like what are all the granular details we know about this person? How can we use that? And unfortunately, sometimes you come off as creepy or off base or whatever. So I think with AI, the key is starting with your definition, for lack of a better word, of personalization. What are you actually trying to achieve? Because the technology can do a lot of things. It doesn't, just because it can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And just because it can do it doesn't mean you need it. So there's a lot of remarkable capabilities out there, but you really have to start almost at, I would say from like a first principles approach and say, what does personalization look like in the context of our business, our brand, and our customers? And then how can we find tools that enable that or scale that?
And that's even before you get into the regulatory elements of dealing with healthcare clients, FinServ clients, where there's only a certain amount you can get and can action upon. So the creepy thing made me think of the cool thing of what Chorus is doing with recording conversations and putting that into even Salesforce. Like they actually know what I said, maybe even here. I don't know, but like that stuff ultimately might be able to be used down the road. And that's dangerous territory, but also maybe it's just because I'm a marketer, but if somebody nails what I'm actually looking for because of something I said on a call 2 weeks ago, like I'm going to be like, hey, good on you. That's good use of data. But also, hey, it's relevant. Like that's the most important thing. If you can make it relevant, sometimes the creepiness factor goes down.
For sure.
Exactly. And that's such a good segue into talking about conversational marketers, because we've talked about the buying landscape changing, right? A lot more millennials are buying. Expectations are much higher than ever, especially in a digital environment. And where that really comes to bear, and this is not, a pitch for Drift, but is in that conversational marketing effort, right? The ability to get the answers you want when you want them. Because, and I would love to see the stat updated, but the last I saw, over 3/4 of buyers will just walk away from a brand, maybe forever, if they've got a bad experience, right? So you have one chance to nail something, to get someone on the hook. And a good way to do that is by engaging them in a conversation right off the bat. So, Barbo, let's start with you. what are you seeing from your clients? How are they leveraging conversational marketing in this new era when it is harder than ever to compete for attention?
I'll start with where we typically start is they come in thinking it's a little bit easier than it actually is. Because there's a lot of tools and technology and data that make you think you can do things like that coffee thing at one and like, oh, we'll just do a bunch of that. And it just is never that easy. Like just like this webinar, right? We start with a plan and then we're probably 80% off the reservation of the things we said we were going to talk about. But at the end of the day, we're going to get there. And I think it sort of requires that marketers go back to the beginning and look back to what we talked about at the outset, the customer experience. What is changing? What does it actually need to be? And you can do conversational bots, you can do conversational things, but the conversational marketing is really an overarching strategy across all the channels. Yeah. And done best. I won't say done right, because you can do things right without doing them like in the most ideal state. But I think when somebody brings conversational marketing up to us, we ask them usually to define it. What does that mean to you? Yeah. And then we know the context and then can sort of explain the whole world and say, how much of that world are you trying to tackle? And go from there. And I think that's how those conversations usually start from us. It's the same thing with CDP. Like, what do you mean when you say CDP? It's the same thing with ABM, right? Like all the sort of things that people have different definitions of, but conversational marketing is the one that typically starts with people having one less zero of what they think they're going to pay for it than they actually probably need to pay for it. That's sort of thematically what I've seen.
Yeah, I think when I, meet people or I talk to my friends, what do I do? I work at Drift. What's Drift? It's a conversational marketing platform. What does that mean? I'm like, well, the bot on the, website, the ability to chat with someone. 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, the next thing was, oh my God, I hate that. I was trying to rebook a flight and blah, blah, blah. The bot didn't do it. I'm like, well, that was a poorly programmed bot. That was a poor use of AI. Kaput, like what are some ways that listeners can better leverage AI when they're thinking about how to either from a deflection standpoint from customer support or the acquisition side, getting someone really interested in giving them what they want, being more intelligent about delivering on that context for the visitor.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the chatbot thing and it being annoying, because the biggest thing I had written down about conversational was there's very few technologies or marketing approaches that are so obvious that are needed. Like people will straight up just leave your website if they can't get an answer to something, even if they want what you're selling. So conversational is a no-brainer, yet we all do it relatively poorly at a macro level. There's companies doing it great, but everyone's annoyed by like the chatbot popping up immediately or whatever. Yeah. So I really do think, again, I don't want to kind of be a one-note band over here, but it really does come down to the human aspect of it. The technology isn't going to solve these things for you. The technology is going to enable the strategy and the approach you put in place at a level that you can't do with humans, but humans have to start with it. So like, I'm the biggest AI proponent in the world, but I would say like, your engineers, no disrespect to them, they create some amazing technology. If they are also not professional communicators, they probably shouldn't be the only people structuring conversational marketing experiences. Like this is, I think there's actually job titles of this now, probably at Drift. Like there are conversational experts or professionals that are structuring these that are not technologists, so to speak. They're professional communicators. Like this is a key part. And I think people sometimes either underrate that or don't see it at all, that it really is, you're creating an experience, and part of the experience is that the actual conversation, not the technology delivering.
That's such a great point, because like typically customer service is buying a bot or sales is buying a bot, and yet those people, like sales they're natural communicators, but to a point, like, hey, when are you going to buy from me? So like too quickly goes down that path sometimes. But I think it's almost funny, like when I think about the 3 ways that a bot can sound, it can sound like a person. Best. That's conversational, has been done right. It sounds like somebody real. Sometimes it is somebody real. Second best is I know it's a bot. Like they're just collecting, and I don't feel like anybody's trying. The worst is when it's a bot that's trying to sound like a person, and I know it's a bot. Like that's the one that makes me mad, that I get annoyed about. And it so there's even ways you can play into that as a marketer. Like hey, we know we're trying to sound, but we're just trying, like, you could even call yourself out, right? And there's some brands that can do that and some that can't. But I think those three types where, you know, consumers coming into that discussion, you kind of have to be aware that that middle section is pretty broad where they're going to be annoyed. So how do you want to have marketers who you think can do that and represent a person? You're just going to be plain Jane, like, we know it's a bot, like, let's all call it a bot? Or do you want to try to live in the middle and, you know, avoid the negativity there? So such a good point.
Yeah, you are the segue MVP today, Barbo. Thank you. Like, you've led us to our next slide every time. You're right. Like, I think people that, you know, we're not in Blade Runner yet, right? Like, we can't fool people with bots. And I think if you're trying to, you're going down the wrong the wrong path. That said, AI is something that, you know, myself as a marketer, I've been getting, you know, shouted out about for, I mean, maybe 10 years, at least 5 years, about how AI needs to make, you know, become part of my strategy. It's always been one of those things where I raised an eyebrow. I'm like, okay, but really, what does that mean? It always seems like something that's coming, but is never within reach. It's something I can tactically use. But I feel like we're finally there. Kaput, like, read us in for your everyday marketer that's coming live in Wichita, Kansas right now. What can he or she do to start to bring artificial intelligence into their marketing strategy?
Yeah, for sure. You hit on a bunch of great points there. So the first thing I do want to address is, yeah, there's a ton of hype and misinformation in AI. And honestly, the industry has taken a long time to mature. I would agree with you that I think we are at a tipping point. But we started Marketing AI Institute 5 years ago and thought we were late. I think we were probably very, very early. It might still be early days today. But the idea behind AI is not some buzzword, some super expensive technology, though it can be in certain contexts, some new thing you have to buy. It's about the idea that is fundamentally different than your typical marketing automation software. And I have nothing, I use HubSpot every day. Like, I have no issue with marketing automation software, but the irony is that the software we have as marketers today is still, even if it's automation, it's still largely manual. Like, you still are telling the machine what to do, and it helps you do it, you know, a little more efficiently, a little more at scale than doing it totally manually, but you're still dictating, you know, the rules of workflows, which emails to send, which segments to target, et cetera, et cetera. Artificial intelligence does represent a pretty phenomenal shift in how technology works. I mean, we're talking about tools that can, in certain contexts with the right data, get smarter on their own, and in ways especially that humans never see. So, like, AI might be telling you to do something that you're like, that sounds ridiculous, but the data has proven out it's actually a really useful strategy. So for your average marketer, I think the biggest thing I would say is, like, this stuff is not, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to start using it. Take me as an example. Like, yeah, I've spent like years reading about and researching this stuff, but, you know, from like day one, I was trying to test out tools. I am not an engineer. I'm not a programmer at all. I'm a marketer, and I was just trying to find technology to do what I was trying to achieve smarter. And AI happened to be the solution for that. So your average marketer, I would say, like, you definitely will at some point have to do your homework about like a deep understanding of what AI can and can't do. But to start, you just need to do a free trial. You need to go get your hands dirty with a tool like Drift. I mean, that's really the solution to a lot of the fear around AI.
I think it's a really good call out. And I think it was you, Barbo, that said, you know, tech is not a strategy, right? Tech enables a strategy. Or I think it was you, Kaput, I'm sorry. And it's so right. Like, I think if maybe this is the thing, is that marketers have been told, you know, you need to do AI. And the response is like, why, right? I haven't come into the scenarios I need that are going to force my hand to start to want to use AI. So maybe that's a question for you, Barbo. What are your clients that are coming to you asking for help with? Like, what are they trying to solve for with AI?
Well, Mike said a big chunk of it, that the initial steps into any technology, which, yeah, technology is never the answer. It is a route to a better strategy, but it starts with the implementation components of that technology. Turning it on is not the definition of success, right? There's the choice you have to make. That's a pain in the ass in the first place. Who do you start with in this sea of LumaScape technologies across, you know, just oceans of choices, right? Like there's just so many things you can choose. So that's who do we choose is number one. We help our clients with that, building a roadmap, building the strategy around those key milestones in that roadmap, and then doing the work of implementation. Our company started out of doing implementations, but we realized how many other avenues it touched. And now we're working across technology and data, go-to-market, CDP implementations for a lot of our partners, including you guys, but also everything from intent orchestration to document management kind of stuff. We're doing all of that because our clients look at the option to get in. They see the conceptual value that AI or some of these other technologies can provide, but then they realize the work that needs to be done on the front end to do it right. And a lot of the times we're stepping into that, helping them make the choice, helping them build those strategies that will accelerate their own growth through the tools, the data, the people, the process, et cetera. And really, Shift Paradigm's goal is to live amongst all these technologies and be the jacks of all trade, and then understand, telling our clients, like, it isn't, if you go by the technology and then hope that that's going to be the answer, you're just going to be having to explain why the technology didn't work in 12 to 24 months. So you have to really spend sometimes 2, 3, 4x the technology costs in getting the implementation and strategy right. And that's frankly the bread and butter of the exercises we've done with clients over the past 3-4 years, is around that strategic consulting that lives between the gaps of all the technologies. And frankly, that creativity and resourcefulness I mentioned earlier, that's where it all lives. That's the fun part, because I doubt we have a rocket scientist on the call, right? Like, we're all marketers. We all learn this along the way, but you can have fun with it too, because even the experts like Mike will admit they're not experts because they spent 20 years building this all from scratch. They just happen to know more than the next person. And if we treat each other like that, we can do some fun stuff.
Absolutely. We are getting close to wrapping up. So I want to give you guys a chance to give our viewers some parting words. While you think about that, I want to invite everyone to download our to take our 2020 State of Marketing AI survey. That was a mouthful. We did one of these 2 years ago, wildly successful, very interesting. We'd love to get your take. There's a URL right there. We'll probably also send this to you in an email. But my parting words is, I'd like to just kind of go back to how we started, where, we are really seeing B2B and B2C buying experiences converge, which I think as a B2B marketer has never been a better time, because I got into B2B marketing because I didn't know it was different than B2C marketing. And all this time I'd wanted to do B2C marketing. And now it feels like I get to. And so I'm thrilled about that. It's a lot more fun. There's a lot more technology. Kaput, any parting words from you?
I would just say, related to the Marketing AI survey, we have done the State of Marketing AI report with Drift last year, and really learned a lot of things about how marketers understand or don't understand and approach AI. And the biggest takeaway, I would say, is this, and we were very surprised by this. We thought, when we asked people about barriers to AI in marketing, we assumed everyone would be like afraid of it, wary of it, whatever. That was a concern for like 15% of people. The biggest barrier, like 70+% of people who were interested in AI but could not get it in their organization, was a lack of education and training. And that alone is holding back so many marketers. And there's not an easy solution for it. Our company exists to try to provide it, but internally, it's probably not always realistic that your company is going to snap their fingers and have like a robust AI marketing education program. So I really would like to just leave people on this call with the parting advice to, like, you are going to have to take your education into your own hands. Our website, marketingaiinstitute.com, is a great place to start. But regardless of what you do, it's a huge opportunity. So I'd encourage you to get curious about it, start exploring it.
Love it. Yes. Thank you so much. Barbo, send us home.
Leaving me with the cleanup spot. I think the education piece is the start, and then there's a whole bunch of people, Shift Paradigm being one of them, that have representational answers to what's happening out in the marketplace, what real clients and customers are doing, and answering questions like, what are the easy ways to try it? Who manages the discipline, right? Like, where does it sit within the organization? We've talked a lot about marketers, but what does that mean for the sales team, the data science team? Like, are they involved? Are they not involved? Do they own it? where does IT sit? Like there's a lot of questions that frankly just sound like hard work sometimes when you try to tackle something that's as big as the term artificial intelligence, right? Like I'll get to that next week. It's on the to-do list, but it's the thing that always shows up near the bottom. And every time you rewrite it, it gets rewritten at the bottom again. And I think if we provide any help to the organizations that we're working with, it's having that opinion on how to do it, what it's going to take from a realistic capacity, both timeline and cost. And I think it is a fascinating space to be in. And frankly, learning more about it makes you smarter, even if you don't engage immediately, because you know sort of the art of what's possible and where you can be pointing to. And I think a lot of people in marketing operations and technology are realizing that now it's less about protecting what you have and perfecting what you have, but learning what else you can bolt on and do to position yourself for the future. Because that's, you know, the adage is what, if you're not growing, you're dying. And it doesn't mean grow your tech stack, but you always need to make sure that your tech stack is facilitating that growth and not getting in the way of it. And frankly, we run into more people where it's getting in the way than it's facilitating growth. And that's why we have jobs. So
amazing. Mike, really enjoyed that conversation. I enjoyed the conversation very much with one Mike. I'm not going to share which one. Gentlemen, thanks so much. It was honestly a really great conversation. I appreciate you spending the time with us. Mike Kaput from Marketing AI Institute, Mike Barbeau from Shift Paradigm. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
This is great. Thank you.